This is Death or Prison, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. The men you are about to hear have spent more than 50 years in prison. We bring you stories of hope and encouragement.
Hello and welcome to the Death or Prison podcast, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I am Johnny Branham, and to my right, Mr. Elmo Golden, and to my left, our distinguished guest, the Florida Secretary of Community Corrections, Mr. Joe Winkler. We're continuing a conversation in community corrections. And one thing I want to get to right off the bat are there any programs or new initiatives on the horizon?
Yeah, we've got a good one that we are going to be starting very soon in community corrections. We are in the infancy stages of developing a curriculum for it. And the program's name, it's called F.A.C.E. And I'll say that term F.A.C.E. quite a bit here in the next few minutes. But before I get into the program, I want to give a quick backstory of how this program originated. It started for me back in 2007 when I had an individual that I was supervising when I was in the Gainesville probation office. This individual had been on probation for a long period of time. He had been back before the courts on several occasions on violations. And as I started supervising him, I thought he was a pretty decent individual on supervision. But one day, myself and a couple other officers went to his residence. We conducted a search of the residence. And when we did, we found some weapons and some other items that put his case in noncompliance. At that point, we arrested the individual. He went to jail, sat in jail for a period of 90 days or so. Then we had a violation of probation hearing. I went to the violation of probation hearing, and when I was there, I testified. And when we were through, the judge said to the individual, I find you in violation, and I hereby sentence you to 27 years in the Florida Department of Corrections. As you can imagine, saying 27 years, the courtroom or the people in the courtroom, they gasped. The individual that got sentenced to supervision, he broke down. And here I am there standing with a stoic look on my face, emotionless, didn't show any emotion. But even though I didn't show emotion on the outside, in the inside, I was breaking down a little bit too. At that point, I said to myself, this person just got sentenced to incarceration for a period of 27 years. What could I have done better in this situation? And as I reflected back, really, there's not a whole lot I could have done. This individual had been in noncompliance before. He had things that put his case in noncompliance. There's not a whole lot I could have really done, but it really got me thinking about probation and the communication between an individual on supervision and that probation officer. I went home that night and I told my wife the story how I had an individual that was sentenced to 27 years in prison for violation of probation. And she took a page out of my book and said, Joe, this person wasn't sentenced to prison for 27 years for violation of probation. He was sentenced to 27 years for his underlying offense. She had used some of the things that I'd said to her before against me, but she was 100% right. He wasn't in there for violation of probation. He was afforded the opportunity to be on probation, but he didn't abide by the rules. But I still thought about this event, and about a week later, we had our monthly staff meeting. And during the staff meeting, our supervisor at the time said that the department wanted us to start a new initiative where we would have probation officers go in the institutions and talk to the inmates about probation. And she asked for volunteers, and nobody volunteered. So she repeated it again, and I reluctantly volunteered to do it. And the reason I did is because I thought back to the event that happened a week earlier and said, you know what? This is my opportunity to improve in being a probation officer. So a few weeks later, I went to the Union Correctional Institution. I went in the room and there were some inmates waiting on me, probably 15 to 18 of them. And about half of them had a look on their face like, what is this guy going to tell me that I don't know? Then half of them looked like they were going to be very receptive. I spoke to the inmates for a period of maybe 2 hours. As I spoke to the inmates, I saw that as the period went on, the inmates that didn't show a lot of interest at first, they started to show interest. They knew at that point that when I came in there that I was really there for them to help them when they get out on the streets to succeed. And they knew that. And by the time I left, I felt like I really sent or delivered a really good message to them. And it started a trend. It started something that I started doing for almost 3 years. Every month for almost 3 years, I went back to Union Correctional Institution and talked to the inmates. And as I started going back and talking to the inmates, as I started going in, the inmates were expecting me. They knew my name. They had questions for me. They conversed with me. They were very receptive to the information that I was telling them. And they knew that I was going to really give them good information to help them as they were released from prison. After I did that for a course of 3 years, I got promoted, or was fortunate enough to be promoted to a supervisory position in Inverness. When I went back to the Inverness office, we didn't have this program, but we had a new initiative that we were looking at, and we were looking at resources that were provided by the family. And we were really emphasizing family support and knowing that if a family was involved in an individual supervision, their chances of success were going to go up greatly. So I talked to my office manager at the time and said I wanted to start a program that was very similar to what I did at the Union Correctional Institution, but this time we would include the family, and we would call it family orientation. So we started the program the first month. We started at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, ended at 7 p.m. We had individuals on supervision come in along with their families. And once again, the first class I had the same initial reception where some of the individuals that were there probably didn't want to be there. But as the class went on during that time, and as it went on through the next year and a half or so, the reception of that class was incredible. People wanted to come to the class. They wanted to hear about supervision. And I'll tell you about supervision as far as the intake process. Whenever somebody gets sentenced to supervision and they walk into probation and the probation officer goes over the conditions of supervision, it's pretty cumbersome. It's a lot of information. It's very overwhelming, and they don't always catch everything being said. When I read articles, I read that people only retain about 10 to 15% of the things that are being told to them. And when they're under stress, it's far less than that. In the intake portion of a probation period, it's very stressful, very stressful. So to think that an individual on supervision, when they first go in and see their probation officer, is going to remember everything about supervision, that's an unfair expectation. So we started this program. It worked out good. Then I eventually got promoted to higher levels, and the program went away. But as I've been promoted through the ranks and during the course of the last 3 or 4 months, I started reflecting back on the event where the individual was sentenced to 27 years in prison, my time going to Union Correctional Institution, and my time participating and facilitating the family orientation classes. I said, we need to start a program similar to that. Then I reflected back on, in probation, if you were to talk to community corrections agencies throughout the country, a lot of them can tell you what their success rate is. They can tell you that how many individuals succeed on supervision. And I can do that for you too and say that 60% or over 60% of our individuals successfully complete supervision. Out of those 60%, approximately 91% of them don't come back to the department's custody within a 3-year period, whether it's prison or probation. Those are great numbers, but it also leaves a little bit less than 40% of people on supervision that are not completing it successfully. So I asked our research and data group to run some numbers for me. I asked them to look at periods of supervision when individuals were in non-compliance. And I knew the answer already. I knew it was at the onset of supervision, but they ran the numbers for me, and they said that approximately 22% of the individuals on supervision have some form of non-compliance reported back to the Sentencing and Releasing Authority within 90 days of being placed on supervision. 22% of individuals within 90 days already have miscommunication with their probation officer. In raw numbers in Florida, that equates to over 18,000 individuals a year that's in non-compliance within the first 90 days of supervision. Those numbers speak volumes. So I said, putting all these things together, we need to come up with a program that is going to emphasize the importance of the communication between the probation officer and the individual on supervision at the onset of supervision. We came up with the program called F.A.C.E. And F.A.C.E has significance in 2 ways. One, by each letter of the term F.A.C.E, the F-A-C-E-I-T, and also in another significant way, which I'll end up with here in a few minutes. But as we look at the first letters or look at the letters and face it, the first letter we have is F. And what I say is if an individual wants to succeed, they've got to have family support, friends, support from friends, or support from faith-based organizations. So once again, if they want to succeed, they got to have the first part, the F and face it, family, friends, or faith-based organizations. The second letter in face it is A. If an individual wants to succeed, they've got to have a good attitude. The C in face it means if somebody wants to succeed, they've got to have the ability to communicate. The E in face it means if somebody wants to succeed, they've got to have employability skills or be employed. The I in face it means if somebody wants to succeed, they've got to improve, got to seek improvement. And the T in face it means if somebody wants to succeed, they've got to take responsibility. And I'm going to go back through each of those letters and give a quick deep dive of what each of those mean. And I'll go back to the F in face it, family support. And at the beginning of our podcast, the first podcast we had, I talked about my wife and said that she has been a big supporter of me, both personally and professionally. What I didn't tell you is that I come from a middle-class family. My mother and father have been married for 55 years. Growing up, I had stability. My father was a postmaster. My mother was a real estate broker. They were people of the community. My father was a Little League coach. My mother was the team mom. I was destined for success. I had family support. I had the right tools needed from my family to succeed. But there's individuals that are being placed on supervision or individuals that are being released from incarceration that don't have good family support. But if they do, and they want to succeed, they need to solicit that family support and seek the guidance and support from that family. Now, if they don't have family support or they want to go to the next level, then at that point they seek the guidance and seek direction from friends. But once again, I'm a realist, and I know that there's individuals that are placed on supervision that may not have family support. They may not have support from friends. But I can tell you this, and I say it with great confidence, and both you gentlemen agree with me, that even though they may not have family support or friend support, that every community in the state of Florida has one thing in common. They have faith-based organizations out there that are willing to assist individuals in succeeding, not just on probation, but in the real world. So when it comes to the term face it and the letter F, that if individuals want to succeed, they solicit family support, support from friends, but out of everything else, solicit support from the faith-based organizations in the community. And I'll say this, and I know we've had conversation before about participation from faith-based organizations, and there may be faith-based organizations that are listening to the podcast. They want to help. They want to aid in an individual's success, but they just don't know how to do that. If there's a faith-based organization out there that wants to support success of individuals on supervision or being released from incarceration, they can go on the Florida Department of Corrections public website. There's a section on there that's for the Office of Reentry. They click on that, and there's an email that they can access. They can send an email to that box, and they can help support success. And if they don't see that box, they can go to the Office of Community Corrections, click on that box, and send an email there. And that email will eventually make it to me, and I'll make sure that that faith-based organization has the ties to the right people that will help support them because they are supporting us and the individuals under supervision. If an individual wants to succeed, they got to have the right attitude. I can tell you when I go home at night, if I walk through the door and I have a bad attitude and my wife sees it, it's going to be a long night in the Winkler household. My attitude is going to it's going to reflect on her, and we're not going to have a very good night. The same thing when it comes to success. If an individual has a bad attitude or the attitude shifts to a bad attitude, the chances for success are going to go down. But if the attitude remains constant, remains positive, their chances for success is going to greatly increase. Once again, I'm a realist. I know that there's times where the going gets tough, and sometimes the attitude may start going south. But at that point, do something that's beneficial, productive, whether it's doing some push-ups, taking a walk, whatever it is, but you got to make sure the attitude is held in check. If the attitude's not good, your chances of succeeding are not going to be that good either. So if you want to succeed, F is family support, the A is attitude, and the C is for communication. And I'll tell you a quick story about communication and something that I learned when I became a leader. And it was a story that was told to us by one of our former secretaries of the Department of Corrections. His name was Kenneth Tucker. Before he came to the Department of Corrections, he had a long and illustrious career with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And when he came to us, he told us as a group of leaders, he said during the course of his successful career with FDLE that there was only 3 occasions that they had problems within the organization. And as he thought back at those problems, he learned that the problems or the issues really weren't an issue. The issue was either lack of communication or insufficient communication. And I reflect back on that conversation quite a bit and the things that he said. And he's absolutely right. I looked at why marriages fail. Marriages fail because, 1, for money, but 2, because insufficient or lack of communication. If an individual wants to succeed, they've got to be able to communicate. Well, what is communication? Well, for the purposes of our conversation, I'll break it down into 3 areas. Communication, 1 is listening, 2 is dialogue, and 3 is nonverbal gestures. And the most important part, to me at least, in communication is the ability to listen. If an individual doesn't listen, their chances of being a successful communicator are not there. During the course of our 4 podcasts, this is our 4th one, we have done a lot of communication through dialogue, and we've asked the listeners to listen. If they listen and go back and reflect back on the things that we said, they're going to hear a lot of really good things. But we need to use them we need to have them use the most important skill in communication, and that is listening. The second part of communication is dialogue, the ability to communicate. And I'm once again a realist. I know that everybody can't articulate as good as Mr. Johnny Brannon. I know that. I know there's people that are placed on supervision that just don't have those same skills. But I do know that when it comes to communication, a lot of times it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And if somebody's communicating with somebody, keep that in mind. Keep a calm demeanor, a calm voice. Remember, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And the last part of communication is the nonverbal. And during one of our last session, I talked about a story about how I had individuals in a room and they were giving me nonverbal gestures. One of them I was reading and thinking they were listening to everything I was saying. And the other one I felt like wasn't. Well, I was wrong. Well, the same thing happens to individuals on supervision. There's times where they'll go in and they'll talk to their probation officer or vice versa, and the nonverbal communication just isn't what it's supposed to be. It's really important when it comes to communication that we understand that the nonverbal gestures that we are making could impact the way the people that are sitting across from us are going to continue to communicate with us. So the C in F.A.C.E is communication. If an individual wants to succeed, they've got to face it, and they do that through employability skills. We've talked about employment once again, and employment is very critical. And I talked about evidence-based research, and I said that evidence-based research says if somebody's employed, their chances of success go up greatly. But I want to share some numbers with you from the Florida Department of Corrections. I look at successful individuals, and one thing I look at when an individual succeeds, are they employed? And what I found out that in the Department of Corrections, out of the individuals that successfully complete supervision, approximately 75% of them are employed at the time that they successfully complete supervision. That doesn't take into consideration the people that are retired or have some kind of other gainful income that is coming in. That is people that are just straight employed. But I'll flip that around and say, since I've been in central office during the course of the last 3 years, every time we have an individual on supervision that commits a serious offense, and what I define as serious offense is when an individual commits a crime where there's a loss of life, the very first thing I look at on that individual that commits that crime, I look in to see if they're employed. And what I found out is that out of the serious offenses that have happened during the course of the last 3 years since I've been in central office or in my positions in central office, that over 82% of the individuals that commit a serious offense where there's a loss of life is not employed. So on one extreme, you've got 75% that are employed and they succeed. On the other extreme, you've got 82% that are unemployed, that are committing serious offenses. And I'll take it one step further when I talk about employment. At the beginning, when I talked about my career, I used that word career. I never once said the word job. I understand that individuals on supervision, they go out and they try to find jobs. I want them to find careers. When it comes to employment and employability skills, it's great to have a job, but it's even better to have a career. So once again, if an individual wants to succeed, they've got to look at employability skills and look at employment. The I in F.A.C.E stands for improve. When we started this segment, I talked about the individual that went back before the courts, and when I found this stuff in his house and the guy got sentenced to 27 years in prison, what is the first thing I did? I looked at ways that I can improve the way I supervise those individuals. I use that same approach when I deal with my personal life. I use it all the time. If an individual wants to succeed in the real world or wants to succeed on probation, they've always got to look at ways to improve. If you look at ways to improve, you're not going to be stagnant, and it's going to increase your chances of succeeding, not just on supervision, but in the real world. And lastly, if an individual wants to succeed, they've got to take responsibility, and that's the T in F.A.C.E. I don't necessarily just mean take responsibility for the crime that they're on supervision for or been convicted of. I mean take responsibility for everything I just talked about. Seeking family support, having a good attitude, having the ability to communicate, being employed, looking at constant improvement. If they do that and take the responsibility to do all those things, their chances of success are going to go up greatly. I really firmly believe that. So the first part of F.A.C.E, if an individual wants to succeed, they do those things. But the other significant portion of the program of F.A.C.E is that when I think back through the course of my career as a probation officer, and I think about the individuals that have successfully completed supervision, there's faces that come to my mind. I think of those individuals and I see their faces. And the reality is that the Florida Department of Corrections, when we think of success, we want to see the face of every individual that's being released from an institution and every individual that's being placed on supervision. Hence the term F.A.C.E. The F.A.C.E has two significances, and those are the two significant portions of the program. Now, is this program going to work? I'm here to tell you it's going to work. I know it's going to work because we've got a structured program that we're working on right now. I've solicited input from several individuals throughout the state, and that's the advantage of being in my position. I know the people out there, they're going to be good train the trainers and people that are going to be good facilitators of this program. I've identified a lot of them throughout the state already. I've talked to some of them. They know they're going to participate in this program. And the criteria that I'm looking for people to facilitate this class is people that have the ability to communicate and people that have a passion for success. If we have those individuals teaching these classes, this program is going to be very successful. Now, with that being said, when it comes to success, I've used the word success as a noun, but the reality is success is not a thing, it's a process. Somebody doesn't wake up in the morning. Johnny Brennan didn't wake up one morning, and Elmo Golden didn't wake up one morning and say, I'm a success. They did it through a process. It's an ongoing process. And if you think you're going to succeed by doing things right one day, that's not going to happen. You continually have to work that process in succeeding. And I also say that we can't do it for you, but as probation officers, we want to do it with you. This program is going to be a good program. What are the next steps for us in the Florida Department of Corrections? Well, for me professionally, I've already talked to some other misdemeanor agencies throughout the state. I'm going to talk to federal probation. I'm going to talk to the Department of Juvenile Justice about this program. We're going to spread the word on how good this program is and what it really signifies. I'm also going to take it a step further. I'm a member of the American Probation Parole Association. I'm also a member of the Florida Association of Community Corrections. Both these organizations are great organizations. They have contact with community corrections professionals just as myself. Here in the upcoming weeks, I'm going to meet with the executive director, Ms. Veronica Cunningham of the American Probation and Parole Association, and the president, Brian Lovins. I'm going to tell them about this program, and I'm going to take it a step further. We're going to have people from the Department of Corrections present at the Winter Institute at the end of January to community corrections professionals from throughout the country. We're going to spread the word. We're going to have inmates that are incarcerated. We're going to have individuals that are on supervision throughout the country say out loud, if they want to succeed, all they have to do is face it.
Mm-hmm.
So where did the first step start at? The first step started here today. Thanks to you gentlemen giving me the forum, giving me the opportunity, and Mr. Ken McKenzie giving me the opportunity to speak about this program. This is the first big step. So I want to thank both of you gentlemen for this opportunity. And when this program gets off the ground and we look back a year or two from now at how well it works, I'm going to credit both you gentlemen for helping us with this program. So thank you.
Amen. We definitely want to be a part of it. Anything that we can do just to make our not only our community safer, but we can, like you said, improve lives. Yeah, we definitely want to be a part of that.
Excellent.
So that's our way of giving back. A lot of times we don't talk about the people that have helped us along the way, and that started in while we were incarcerated. So we're talking about the correctional officers. We're talking about the men that may never get out, that have been supporting us and saying this is what you need to do on your way out. The mentoring programs that are there. So now we're out here and we're still getting major support. Even when we go through our tough times, there's still a voice in our head saying that you can do it, you can make it. And so what you're bringing to the table now is unheard of. It's brand new. It's something that we know, like you said, it's going to work. It's time for everybody to face it. So it's what you're doing is remarkable, and I'm definitely in. What about you, Johnny?
Both feet, both hands. I'm all in. We have a program that's implemented. The listeners who are regular listeners, and for you who are first-time listeners, you're going to hear about it first here. And it's a peer-to-peer mentorship program that was instituted by Secretary Mark Inch, where it's short-timers are mentored by long-term sentence residents. The idea is that through a 6-month period, these men and women are mentored, and then we return into society. One of the things that I've begun to do at my church through my ministry is also mentor men and women who are out in society. Some of them are returned citizens like myself. Others are just people in the community, pastors, leaders, business owners. And the idea is that the baton is passed so that that person enters society or hits the gate with someone else that's going to continue that mentorship program. Elmo was at the very first one that we had at our school in Tampa. The role of faith in faith-based organizations in what you're talking about. Some of the things are already going on throughout the state as far as people are being trained and people are being brought up to be able to be mentors and to be that person that speaks into the life of someone that you were just mentioning, that person that's coming out on parole, that person that's coming out on probation. How can we further strengthen those ties with what you were talking about, the F.A.C.E program?
Excellent. Through our partnership here today, this is a really good first step on that as well. I can talk to the inmate population or individuals on supervision, and I already told them that I come from a really good family. I was blessed to begin with. There's some people out there that didn't have the same path that I had, that had a much more difficult path. They took that path, but they learned from it, and those are the people that we really want spreading the word. So from the course of our conversation today, I know we're lacking on mentors in the community through community corrections, but I think through our partnership and as we continue to evolve with us communicating with one another, there's people out there just like the two of you gentlemen that we can use in mentorship programs, and I would love to use them on the outside with individuals that are on supervision. What a great first step and what a great partnership that we're going to form because of this podcast and our conversation here today.
Yes.
Well, it's a great conversation. I think that Johnny left out something also that we go back into the prisons already. So, and we do go in and we talk about the mentorship program. We talk about how their voice is being heard on the outside, that they're participating in the rehabilitation of other guys. You got to understand what I'm saying. There are men and women in prison that are mentoring men on their way out. So it's very important that we have programs like F.A.C.E that are inside those prisons. We have the program where Mark Inch is putting into the prisons, because that way that gives that guy a better chance of, and when he steps out, he has somebody waiting for him. And so by using men and women that have currently been incarcerated and go back in and tell them, hey, this is what's going on, and it's all being done for you. That's something that has never been heard, that you got somebody coming in, they doing this for us. We're sitting at the table now. We are the problem, but now we're the solution. And that's what's really going on behind those walls. And it's just like what we say here, these are stories of hope. It's no matter what else is going on, when you can interject hope into some of those guys, men and women that are incarcerated, you'll be surprised what type of behavioral change happens in the prison. It's easier for everybody that an officer doesn't have to come in and say stuff to you, or he can look at you as a person, as a man that's developing and improving. That A in attitude with F.A.C.E is perfect. We can change that attitude, we can change the thinking, we can change the behavior.
I had the privilege of going into the Florida Women's Reception Center just about a couple of months ago with Alpha USA and Lean On Me USA, speaking to the women, because they had already begun a program there. And I'll never forget, when I began to share my testimony, some of the questions that the women would ask me: how did you get to the point to where you are? Because there was a curiosity, and that curiosity came from the testimony. We look throughout the entire Bible, men of faith like David, men of faith like Moses, men of faith like Peter and Paul and all these people. And their names are in the book of the Bible for a reason. Their names are in the Bible for a reason, because testimony is important. When I look at F.A.C.E and I look at the F, the family, friends, faith-based organization, mentor, how important that I'm looking at that as the top. It's almost like it's the umbrella that gets it going. But one of the key things, and I'll share this with the men and the women as they're listening, and I'll speak right to them. That foundation in faith, that foundation in Christ is what did it for me. That constant relationship that I have with Jesus Christ, that's one of the things that, not one of the things, that is the thing that made me successful. And so when I say that to encourage you. There's something that's at the bottom of the screen at each and every one of these podcasts. And we talk about connecting to a welcoming, mentoring church near them. We make that a stickler. It's important. When they connect, their families connect, rather, and they're connected to that welcoming, mentoring church, that's the beginning of a foundation that gives them the stability to continue to do whatever it is that they're doing. Was every day perfect for me? I guess I'll segue into you, Mr. Winkler. Was every day perfect for me? No. Were there challenges? Of course. I lost my mother upon being released. There were times when doors were slammed in my face. There were times when I had challenging days where I didn't know if I was going to be able to receive work working at a place where I was doing day labor. But one of the things that constantly kept me with the ability to continue to look up was my faith. And that's what gave me the energy to continue to keep going. I had a loving father that said, hey, son, dust yourself off. Let's keep moving. So I'm excited. I'm excited to get into partnership with this. We're excited about it. Is there anything else about the program that you want to share with the listeners?
It's going to be a very structured program, and it goes back to the success of the program is going to be because of the people that are participating, and probably just importantly, or more importantly, the people that are going to be facilitating the class. That ability to communicate and their passion for success is going to help move this program forward. So,
passion. There's one word, passion. If you want to change, there's people right now. You're hearing it from the Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections. This isn't the norm.
Yeah.
This is something God is doing. I want you to see the God in this.
Right.
If God can't touch your heart right now and you to see that God is reaching out through these podcasts to you saying, hey, there's somebody here that wants to help you, we're going to say it again. This is a God thing. Grab a hold of it. Grab a hold of it. This is the Death or Prison podcast brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I am Johnny Branham, and to my right, Mr. Elmo Golden. To my left, you have been hearing some wonderful things from the Florida Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections, Mr. Joe Winkler. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for the information. Remember the name, F.A.C.E. You're going to be hearing a lot about that. This is the Death or Prison podcast, but fellas, what do we say? Choose life.
I can change the world. Feed one, teach one boy and girl. Maybe we can change the world.